I have had to really untether from the idea that I have any clue about what is affordable for someone else or what is expensive for someone else. And that those ideas of like expensiveness or affordability, expensiveness and accessibility, those are not like fixed numbers. They're very shifting depending on context. The sense of wanting things to be accessible to people based on my own version of what access looks like is like a really distorted way of approaching things.
What's your earliest memory of money? Mine is going with my parents to open my own bank account at our local credit union. A lot of our experiences with and stories around money come from our childhood and how we saw money handled, what we got told about money, and that stuff sticks with you. I'm Susan Bowles, and you're listening to Break the Ceiling, the show where we break down unconventional strategies you can use to save time, boost your profit, and increase your operational capacity. We all have a completely unique and individual relationship to money that's influenced not by just those factors, but also the impact of every decision, good or bad, we've made with our own money, and the impact of every decision, good and bad, we've seen other people make with their money. Your relationship with and access to money is impacted by your societal class, your demographics, and your generational wealth or lack thereof. And it's also influenced by the society you live in. And if you're in the US, at least, that means a capitalist society. One where power and money are often interchangeable, and where the depth of inequality is stunning and only getting more dramatic. So some of the work around examining our relationship to our money also needs to examine how the system that we live in impacts that relationship, because it does. And once we understand that, we can start thinking about our relationship to money in a much broader view. And we can start considering using our businesses as a means to start evening out some of that inequality. My guest today spends a lot of time thinking about, talking about, and teaching this work. Hebert is a radical life coach, social justice educator, and anti-capitalist business consultant. In work and in life, Hebert actively looks at the intersections of power and privilege and will ask you to do the same, pushing both you and your business in the direction of more liberated moments. Hebert and I talk about the value of doing money mindset work and how your relationship to money affects just about every area of your business. And we do a deep dive on pricing. We'll talk about how Hebert approaches making their services more accessible and talk about what accessible actually means in the first place. Hi, Hebert. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, Susan, thanks so much for having me.
So when we're dealing with money and our relationship with money, one of the most kind of common pieces of advice when you come up against issues is to do money mindset work, and that is supposed to kind of get you through your issues. So when you come up to a bump in the road where your own mindset around money is starting to create some limitations, you get told to go, do money mindset work. But that could mean a lot of different things. So how do you think about money mindset work?
Yeah, I love this question because how I tend to work with my clients around money and money mindset, I think is maybe a little bit different than some of the, standard online business advice. So the way that I tend to orient my clients around money mindset is that I encourage them to think about specifically like their lineages of belief around money and work. So rather than saying sort of like, what is your personal what are your personal limiting beliefs or whatever, actually really trying to trace those money mindset issues back in time and being able to say, what did I learn about money or work from my parents? What did I learn about work or money from my siblings? What have I learned about work or money from, my grandparents? Like basically all the sort of people around you that have had an influence on how each of us has come to think about money. And then from there to really think, and what is it that I actually believe, right? So I tend to work with people who have more of a, who care about social justice, who care about sort of being in ethical alignment inside their business. And so frequently they find themselves at odds sort of with the typical business advice and their own kind of heart, their own ethics, their own inclination around these things. And so these old ideas that may have come passed down through our family line, through our lineages, that there's frequently like a deeper truth underneath that you already know to be true, right? That you're holding on to, that you're like, oh yeah, my parents taught me that, for example, the only way that I could be secure in my life is to have a 9-to-5 job with a salary. That may be a belief. That's an example from someone else, not from me. My own lineage, my own money lineage stuff is different than that, but that is a really common one, I think.
Yeah, that's very solidly my family lineage.
Yeah, right. And I think it's a really common one that the and I think especially for folks in small, who are small businesses who are working for themselves, that there can be this really pervasive sense that unless you have, a salary job that's regular, that's coming from someone else, who is employing you, that there will never be anything but lack and scarcity. But that if you dig a little deeper, there may be a sort of deeper truth, a deeper knowing underneath that says, maybe it's possible that I could make enough money from my business. Maybe it's possible that my job was never really that secure at all. And so really starting to kind of like dig in and see what else might be possible in addition to or instead of these deeper sort of like familially passed on ideas around money.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because so much of how we get kind of indoctrinated into money comes from our family and how they are teaching us about it, because we don't teach money in schools or in like common culture. Money is not one of the things that we teach. So most of your understanding of money and how you relate to money comes from your family structure or your childhood relationship with money. So I think it's really interesting to go all the way back and understand how far back that generational stuff kind of tracks back to.
Yeah. And I think that the thing that I think can be really fun about that too for me is that we can also then sort of look at the good stuff, like what beliefs about money that your family had might actually serve you. I think of my own life. My parents. I grew up sort of working class and working poor, and my parents always had many jobs. My mom always had 3 jobs, and so a belief that because of that, I have tons of kind of scarcity patterning around money. But one of the things I also got is the belief that I can be really scrappy and really resourceful. And that if there is money available, I can go out and find it. I can go out and get it. And that's a belief that like I saw my parents doing that through my whole childhood, that they were always sort of, hustling for the next thing. And that, that I can sort of choose, each of us can choose, like, what are the pieces of that money mindset lineage that you want to hold on to? What are the pieces that you want to amplify? What are the pieces that you want to sort of lean into? And what are the pieces that maybe aren't serving you or aren't relevant for you that you could really let go of?
I love the idea of just letting go of it.
I know.
Easier said than done,
exactly,
I feel like, but also feels very freeing.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think it's definitely not any kind of mindset work is never sort of like one and done, right? You don't just like have a new thought and then poof, the old thought never returns. It's like it's a repetitive practice. You have to think the new thought, 10,000 times before it sticks around. So yeah, definitely a lifelong work, lifelong labor.
So there's real value, often even real tangible financial value, to doing work on your own relationship with money, your mindset around money, because our relationship with money impacts so much of what we do as business owners, how we price our services, how we decide to invest our time, our resources. It affects who we choose to work with. So talk to me a little about that. How do you approach the value of working on your mindset or your relationship with money?
Yeah, I think I don't have any sort of specific dollar amounts in terms of like return on investment for working on money mindset that I can point to. But I have really seen the ways that my own kind of ideas around. So let me backtrack a little bit. I have had real sort of concern about wanting to make sure that my work is financially accessible to anyone who wants to have access to it, right? And that's because of my sort of social justice analysis, because of my orientation to my work in the world. I want to make sure that my work is available and that money isn't a barrier that keeps people away from being able to work with me. And many of my clients have this same kind of inclination of like really caring that other people can access it. But then because of that, I have had to do in my own, in terms of my own money mindset work, have had to really untether from the idea that I have any clue about what is affordable for someone else or what is expensive for someone else. And that those ideas of like expensiveness or affordability, expensiveness and accessibility those are not like fixed numbers. They're very shifting depending on context. And so for the longest time, I was really stuck in a place of sort of putting a max cap on how much I could charge for anything. So for many years in business, I felt like I couldn't charge more than $1,000. I couldn't charge more than $900. Like I had this block in my mind that if I charged $1,000 for something, that it was just like this astronomical number that no one on the planet could possibly afford. And it was actually a friend of mine who's also in business who suggested that I just take my regular package and instead of raising my hourly rate for it, just double the package, like offer twice as many sessions and therefore twice as much money. And that was the thing that sort of like got me over that mental block around charging more than $1,000. And I just was like, okay, well, just as an experiment, I'm going to put this like bigger, more expensive package on my website. And I was totally floored that suddenly many people were interested in giving me $1,800. And I was just, I was flabbergasted because to my mind, that was a number that was just so expensive, so unaffordable. And that no one, because it was expensive to me, I assumed that it was expensive to everyone. And it's just not true. For many people, that number is like a totally doable number. And in fact, now I charge a lot more than that, right? So that was several years ago that I, it finally broke through that $1,000 barrier. But it turns out that like my ideas of what's expensive or accessible is really rooted in my own lived experience with money, and that many other people are having a wildly different experience around money. And so the sense of like wanting things to be accessible to people based on my own version of what access looks like is like a really sort of it's a really distorted way of approaching things. And so instead, now I'm sort of like, okay, let me base things on facts rather than on my feelings about money. And it's, I mean, I could go in and do the calculations of like how much more money I'm making now that I don't have this sort of internal block around how much I can charge. And now it's like, yeah, I can charge $5,000. I could charge $10,000. I could charge whatever amount. And I know that for someone, that's a doable number.
I like that. And I think that's a really common scenario for a lot of business owners, especially service business owners, where the pricing is essentially random. I mean, there's no, like, everybody's packages and what they're offering and what their experience is so disparate that there's really no way to compare apples to apples. So how you choose to price your services is really sort of arbitrary. And because it's, we're not pricing widgets. There's no like comparison shopping really. And so I think in situations like that, how you view money and your own approach to money can be such a limiting factor for you, you know, especially as you're getting to what for you might be kind of the quote unquote next level. You know, I think everybody has a next level of, I couldn't possibly charge any more than X, or I can't imagine making any more than this amount of dollars.
Right.
That there is a number to you that is unfathomable, wherever that is on your, like on the actual number scale, and being able to kind of process that and come to terms with it can be something that allows you to get past that as a limitation for yourself.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're really so right that it is really arbitrary. And, you know, I have a couple of thoughts there. One is that I think, so the way that and I teach a whole online course about this, but the way that I advise people to set their prices is actually based on how much money you personally need, rather than what you think other people can pay or what other people are charging for similar services, but to actually really like crunch your own numbers and go like, how much money do I need to live the life that I'm trying to live? Like, how much money do I need to be able to pay my taxes, save for retirement, you know, go on a trip whenever traveling is a thing we can do again, whatever the kinds of like, sort of like, how much money do I need in order to have a life that's beautiful, that has space and money to include beauty in it? That's the sort of criteria that I look at. And then how many hours can I work? How many clients do I think I'll have? And then basically just like do that math of, how much money do I need divided by how many hours can I work, or how many clients do I think I can get? And then that gives you sort of a starting point for like your base hourly rate. And I think the thing to me that's really freeing about doing things that way is that I'm not personally interested in like perpetual financial growth for its own sake. I actually think that that's like, it's part of why the world is so inequitable, is because we've prioritized constant churning growth forever. And instead, to me, I'm really interested in like figuring out what enough feels like. What is a good, like, beautiful, rich life look like? And by rich, I don't mean financially rich. I mean like, you know, rich with texture and with experiences. What does that look like? And how much money do I need to have that? And then just like being able to find contentment there, and not always needing to like reach for the next thing, not always needing to sort of like keep growing, keep, you know, striving, which I think is in real, you know, sort of harsh contrast to a whole lot of the standard business advice and money mindset advice. And probably some money mindset coach out there would tell you that my idea that I should stop making, that I should like not constantly be growing as my own money mindset issues, but whatever.
Well, I also think that, I mean, there's just so much like social and cultural programming that choosing to be content at whatever your enough is can be a real struggle, because you're constantly having to fight all of those external messages that says, you know, you should be the next Amazon.
Right.
When, quite frankly, he has more money than any country.
It's unconscionable.
Like, it is. That is the best. I'm like, why do you need that money?
Yeah.
Like, what could you possibly be like? It's so life-changing, and so like you could have such an amazing impact on the world using that for literally anything else.
Right.
Like do anything else with it.
Yep.
But that's, you know, that's the message that we get sold, and I'm sure you're right that there is somebody out there that says that, you know, that's a money mindset issue. But I think it's also comforting, at least for me, to say, you know, here's where enough is, you know, that's good. I'm comfortable there. I'm happy there. And so I think it's only a limitation if you intentionally choose it to be a limitation.
Right. Yeah. And I think for so many small business owners, like it, you know, we show up to our work with all of our kind of self-worth issues, all of our trying to sort of get our unmet needs met through our work, and that sense of like I feel like there's such a correlation between I never have enough money and I can never be good enough. I am never good enough. And that really, for me, part of the practice of learning to sit with what enough looks like financially is also a practice of looking at what enough looks like for me as a human. Like how much effort, how much goodness, how much, kindness and compassion is enough. Like at what point can I sort of say, I'm okay just as I am. I have enough. This amount of money is okay just as it is, right? I'm okay as a person, just like this. And I don't always have to be sort of striving for greater self-improvement. Which of course is really tricky. I'm a coach. I help people with
that's really hard. That's
right?
A really hard place to sit, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really tricky. It's really tricky to just be okay with who you are and to let, for me, the practice of a lot of my money mindset work is about finding that enoughness in all aspects, not just financially.
Yeah, I like the approach of it as a practice, that this is something that you are constantly practicing, not something that you can go and, okay, I'm going to work on my mindset right now. I'm going to work on my money mindset and check the box and I'm done. I'm good for a while. Like, because
Right.
that's just not how it works in real life. We might get past one block or one mindset issue for this specific scenario where we are accomplishing it. And the next time that you run into that issue, when you decide if you take a next level or you go into a different area, it comes rearing back up.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of having it as a practice, that it's just kind of constantly working on sitting with it and being okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I know as you were saying that, I was imagining us doing like money mindset workouts, like little like dumbbell, like pumping our little money mindset dumbbells.
But I feel like that's the approach to so much of the kind of personal development work, mindset or otherwise, that comes with being a business owner. Is the message is that if you go and you work with a coach or you check the box and you do your, you go off and do your money mindset work, that it's done. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of being a business owner, so much of that is an evolution and it's a journey, and it's really only done when you die.
Yeah.
There's not really a done to it, which I think is a hard, at least for me, it's really hard place to sit, that there's no like, I mean, I'm an Enneagram 3, so I'm very achievement oriented. It's a real like sitting with enoughness and sitting with trying to readjust to not being as achievement oriented is very difficult for me. So it's something that I am always working on.
Yeah, I understand that definitely. I'm an Enneagram 8, so I also have some of that driving force. Which I think is an asset in business in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think it's both. It's a there's a paradox there of how challenging it can be to really sit with ourselves and sit with enoughness to try to find contentment with what we have and who we are. And there's also a sort of freedom to knowing that it really is never done. Because then it means I don't have to run as fast. It means I don't have to like work quite as hard, because I'm like, okay, well, it's not like once I like, surmount this obstacle that then there are no more obstacles ever. It's like, so I can, sort of take my time a little bit more and be a little easier on myself as I do the work, because it's not as urgent as my heart, mind, nervous system might sometimes make it feel like it is.
Yes. It's that time of year. Time to set some new goals or consider your New Year's resolution. And if you're like a lot of business owners I know, you might be thinking that this is the year you're gonna get your shit together when it comes to your money. You're gonna start reviewing that P&L statement you get every month. You're going to be more intentional about how you spend and closely tracking the ROI you're getting. You're going to get clear on exactly how you're making money and how you can make more of it without working yourself into the ground. Now, if you're both nodding your head and feeling the anxiety rise in your chest as I describe these financial goals, I see you. We all have the best of intentions about how we're going to manage our business finances. But few people actually follow through on learning how to manage their business's money or execute the financial plans they create. You want to feel like you're on top of your money stuff, but it's tough to climb over all the questions and reports and bank accounts and spreadsheets. That's where I come in. I help you think like a CFO. Working together, you'll learn the skills you need to confidently make database decisions about how to spend your money and how to structure your business so you make more. You'll build a more resilient business that's efficient and easy to run. And you'll create meaningful financial processes so you're never caught with your pants down again. Think Like a CFO is a 6-month accelerator, online workshop, and coaching program that will teach you to think about your business like a CFO would. We'll cover 6 core topics, including risk and resilience, investing in your business, scaling sustainably, and your relationship with money. You'll also get dedicated implementation time and live support so you don't get stuck on the details or the execution. And you'll get a clear path to true small business financial literacy so you can connect your money to every other aspect of your work, from daily operations to long vacations. Think Like a CFO is enrolling right now, and when you register before December 31st, you'll also get my course, Not Rocket Finance, which is the perfect primer for Think Like a CFO. To find out more about Think Like a CFO and finally get your business shit together, go to scalespark.co/CFO. So let's kind of talk a little bit about money mindset work more in depth. So there's a lot of money mindset people out there that, really push the kind of manifestation, this idea that if you think about something hard enough or you can, will it into being, that the money you want or the money you need will just kind of show up for you. And maybe it will. There's research that says, committing to a goal makes you more likely to accomplish that goal generally. But that money won't necessarily show up for everyone. So if it doesn't show up for them, are they just not doing it right? Or are they not manifesting hard enough? What's your approach on that kind of manifestation aspect that is really, I think, ingrained in a lot of the money mindset and even just some coaching practices?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I feel like it's such an important conversation for us to be having in the sort of self-employment online business space. I think to me, the place where a lot of manifestation teaching misses the mark is that it puts an overemphasis on individual agency. And it totally sort of decontextualizes us out of the systemic and cultural contexts that we live inside of. Right. So all of us are alive in this human form. And for most of us in the United States and probably in lots of places in Europe, I don't know where all your listeners are, but right, we're all sort of, most of us are functioning inside of capitalism. And there are these real sort of systemic issues that make it more possible for some of us to, quote unquote, manifest money than others of us. And I think there's a real sort of tendency to think that like my abundance mentality is what made me wealthy or is what made someone wealthy. But if we really look at it, it's like, okay, what typically makes people wealthy is whiteness, being white, being male, having grown up with family wealth, like having access to a family that is already wealthy. Like those are the main factors that make it likely that someone is able to, quote unquote, manifest money. And the flip side of that, I think, is that there's a lot of like victim blaming that happens around poverty. And this idea that a poverty mentality or a scarcity mentality, scarcity mindset is what causes people to be poor. But if we actually look at the demographics, if we actually look at the cultural context, it's like being a person of color is something that is, makes you more likely to to be poor, and also, the sort of historical access to wealth are those are actually the predictors of someone's access to money or access to wealth. And so I think there's a real sort of we tend the money mindset world, the especially the sort of manifestation law of attraction brand of things tends to really turn a blind eye to this cultural context, and instead says, well, your individual behavior, your individual thoughts are the things that draw money to you. But in reality, it's not that way, right? If we look at the facts, it's just not true.
Yeah, I think this is it's really, really apparent if you look at like the world of VC capital and who gets invested in. And I think I saw something that like there are companies that have gotten VC capital that, it's one company and they get more VC capital than all female founders or all people of color founders.
Yep.
In an entire year. And
yep.
the access to capital is a very real issue when you're talking about trying to grow a company, particularly if you're growing, a big company, less of a, small business. But even in small business, your ability to access credit or capital or loans to get started is heavily impacted by your demographics and your personal situation, which is heavily impacted by the system.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think I didn't know those statistics, but I'm totally not surprised by that at all. I mean, when you look at, there's so many studies around the sort of racial wealth gap and how wealth has accumulated in families over time. And it's really, I mean, it's stark, even adjusted for all other factors like having a college degree and, education level and that kind of thing. Race is just a predictor. It just is. It's a really strong predictor of wealth and sort of net worth in the United States anyway. And I think the tendency to want to overlook that or downplay that is it does a real disservice to all of us. And I think it's at best, it's a sort of innocent overlooking, and at worst, it's like a real intentional downplaying and victim blaming that people leverage to make more money, mm-hmm. which is just, absolutely. It's just, it's really, I think we really, there's a lot of unlearning that we need to do as a culture and as a culture as a whole, and specifically in the online business space, there is work that is, I think, specific for us to do around challenging that idea that if you just think hard enough that you can get the money that you need, and that if you are struggling financially, that it's your own fault.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. So talk to me, take me a little bit in that direction. So what are some things that we could consider or take into account, either when we're working on our own relationship with money or in our businesses, especially if we want to work towards kind of generally doing less harm or orienting ourselves towards justice as a business owner?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about this. The first thing that I think I said this already, but the first thing I really recommend people do is to start by setting your rates based on what you need, not based on anything else. And I think it's a real sort of, it is really like a sort of anti-capitalist idea to say I should charge based on the money that I need to get, not based on the money that I think I can acquire.
This is very, very contradictory to the common, charge what you're worth kind of.
Oh yeah.
Pitch.
Yes, and I mean that pitch, the charge what you're worth pitch. I have some real controversial, perhaps.
Feel free to rant. We're okay with rants here.
Great. Well, my personal rant on that is that that taking worth out of the equation is so important and is so useful, because then it makes it so that when you charge based on the money that you need, it creates a sort of like energetic clarity. Wherein if I know I need to charge $2 $200 an hour, just pulling some numbers out of the air, right? If I need to charge $200 an hour in order to get the money that I need in order to live the life that I'm trying to live, right? That then when I go onto a sales call with a client, I'm not having any kind of like internal like hemming and hawing about, am I allowed to charge this much? Are they going to think I'm whatever by asking for this amount of money? Because I know this is just what I need and I'm allowed to get what I need, right? So doing some of that work around feeling like you're allowed to have what you need, that may be part of your money mindset work. Mm-hmm. It has been part of mine, but it's really freeing to know that my numbers are not actually arbitrary. They're different maybe than somebody who lives in a city with a higher cost of living. They're different than somebody who has like 3 kids. I don't have any kids, right? So like my rates are based on living in a small city, single, childless, like, a pretty low overhead. And I charge what I charge because that's the money that I need to have the life that I'm trying to have. And that really, the sense of like what your worth is, tying that to money, I think is so deeply damaging for our psyches. And to be able to just like untangle that a little bit and go like, okay, this is the money that I need. And that doesn't have anything to do with my worth. My worth as a human is like innate and inherent. And, my worth as a human is a birthright and it has nothing to do with my prices.
Yeah, I love that. So Are there other things you think we should be thinking about or taking into consideration as we work on our own relationship to money, or just practices we can put in place as business owners?
Oh yeah, other business practices. When I think about like causing less harm, my constant refrain to my clients is that, which I think is also like a little bit radical and a little bit potentially controversial, is that it's really important, actually, if you're trying to have an equitable business, it's really important to have all the things that you offer also be available for free to people who need them, which is like a wild thing to say because there's so much messaging about like not undercharging and not sort of underselling yourself, right? But I'm not saying you need to like give all your work away for free. But the idea that like, if you're trying to create a business that has accessibility, like financial accessibility built into it, that accessibility has to go all the way down to $0. And I'll explain sort of how I make that work financially.
I'm like, I want to hear the logistics of this. Like you've got me hooked. Like I am interested in the logistics of this. So talk to me about how you implement that.
Right. So the basic framework for this is that like, no matter how cheap something is, it will always be too expensive for someone, right? So I witnessed this last summer. I ran Freely, my online course about pricing your work, and it was $19 for a 90-minute webinar, live webinar, 90 minutes, $20, right? And I thought to myself, this is great. This is a number. It's super low, low barrier to entry. Most people.
I'm like, I feel like that's probably pretty accessible for most folks.
Right. You would think, right?
Or at least I would think.
I also thought, except that then I put it out there and I got not a ton of messages, but I got a handful of messages from people that said, hey, I don't get paid for 2 more weeks. Is there any way I can like do this for free or any way I can whatever, right? Hey, I really, and I always, because it is the practice that I have, I always sort of put like, if this number is not accessible for you, let me know and we'll work it out. And I was surprised at the number of people for whom $20 was just not a number they could reach. And so I think there's a real sort of, I see this all the time. People do things sliding scale and it's like, it's $40 to $60 sliding scale. And I'm like, I see your heart in that. Like I see the intention in that. But like in reality, for most people who could pay $40, they can also pay $60.
60. Yeah,
exactly. And for people who can't pay 40, like they may not be able to pay 5. And so creating a wider spread that allows for people who really truly don't have enough to be able to say, I want access to this service or this class or this whatever, and I can't pay for it or I can pay very little for it. Then also you have to so the logistics of it is that you have to then charge a high enough rate, generally speaking, that your clients who have access to more money are sort of like on the back end subsidizing the people with less, right? So I have clients
Yep.
who pay me like $350 an hour, and I have clients who pay me $35 an hour because that's all they can afford. And those two numbers average out to a rate for me that works out hourly. It like works out so that that is like covering my needs.
Mm.
And I my experience of, for a long time I tried to do, or for a while anyway, I was trying to do sort of sliding scale, letting people opt into paying more or paying less. But the problem is that because of capitalism, everybody feels like they never have enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even people with a lot of money, right? There's some of my favorite statistics about this. There's a study, I think I always forget I think it's from Harvard Business School, interviewed people who have $25 million or more in assets. So like hyper wealthy people, right? And then asked them, do you feel financially secure? And like 2/3 of the respondents to this survey said no. These people with $25 million
Like
in assets
what are
do
you
not,
doing with
right?
$25 million? Like, can you take a little bit of the cash out of your I'm gonna roll around in cash room
Right?
and like maybe put that in a savings account so that you feel financially secure?
Right. I know. And then the wild thing to me is that the follow-up question to that was, if no, like if you don't feel financially secure, estimate about how much more money you would need to have in order to feel financially secure. And the average like a dollar amount was about 20% more than they already have, which to me is just like so like illustrative that like we don't feel. I think that that rings so true for me. Like I frequently, when I feel like I don't have enough, it's I don't
Yeah, I want
feel
about
like
20% more.
exactly like I don't need to like I don't need twice as much money as I currently have, but if I just had a little bit more, then I would feel okay. If I just had 20% more, then I would be able to relax. Then I would feel financially secure, right?
Yep.
But I think that sense of scarcity and always wanting just a little bit more chases us through, all the sort of income brackets.
Yeah, that is so interesting.
And so asking people to opt into paying more goes directly counter to that sense of scarcity. Who would opt into wanting to pay more for a service if they could pay
That you could get it
less?
for less.
Nobody wants to do that.
No, you're
So,
right.
so unless you're operating in, and I've seen sliding scale be successful for people who are, like really sort of like politicized healers, people who are operating in a community of activists, or people who are like their whole community is sort of on board and is already having this conversation about wealth inequality. Like maybe in some of those kinds of circumstances, a sliding scale can work because there may be enough people who are financially comfortable, who are politicized, who would choose to pay more. But the vast majority of people with money don't have that kind of political analysis and aren't opting into paying more.
No.
So all of that is to say that the way that I have sort of like rectified this issue is by not giving them, not like making it a choice that they have to opt into. I just say my rate is, the rate is X. And if that's not affordable for you, let me know. And so then for everybody who that number is affordable for, they just pay it.
They just say it.
They
Yeah.
just pay it, no big deal, whatever. And then for the people for whom that number is prohibitive, then they can send me an email and say, hey, this doesn't work for me or whatever. And, I typically I could tell you more about the sort of like actual back end logistics of how I make that work if that's interesting for people. But yeah.
I am personally, I am very interested. So are you when people reach out and they say, hey, that's not accessible, are they reaching out and saying, hey, that's not accessible, but X would be? Are they saying, hey, that's not accessible, what kind of a deal can you do for me? You know what I mean? Like, how
Yes.
is that? How do you approach that response? Because I think the nuance there is really where the success of these sorts of programs happens. And it's not necessarily in the logistics of like, how do you set up a sliding scale? It's more about how do you communicate and address the nuances in that kind of a system.
Yes. Yeah. I think you're totally right there. It's so I use a different approach depending on what I'm selling. So if I'm selling something that's like an online course where it's like one to many, I set up a discount code on my website that is that's generally made publicly available. So especially if it's an online course that like any number, like there's an infinite number of spots in the class or a pretty high number of spots in the class. I don't make people even email me about it. I just say,
you don't want to bother with the logistics.
I don't want to bother.
You think this is you? Just put in that code.
Here's the code. Here's how you use it. And I typically will say, like, I'll typically give a half off code and a totally free code. And then I usually include my Venmo information. And I'm like, if you want to pay me a different amount besides like full price, half price, or zero, you can Venmo me the difference and just like include a note that says, here's what the difference is, so that people have a little bit more control. If they're like, well, I can't pay $50, but I could pay $20. And I'm like, great, you can send me that. So I tend to let people do that way. And then when I'm working with one-on-one clients, all of those financial conversations are happening, live on a sales call. And so I don't negotiate. It's not a negotiation, right? It's not like, how good of a deal can you get from me? That's not the conversation that we're having. But when we get on the call and I say, we decide we would like to work together, and I say, okay, here's how it works. It's 6 months. It's $2,100. Here's the deal. Here's what the payment plan would look like. How does that, would that work for you, basically? And then when someone says, that's really sort of out of my budget, the question that I ask is, what is a number that would feel doable for you per month? Like, if we're going to go on a payment plan monthly for the next 6 months, like, what is a number that would feel doable for you? And then usually people say something that's like just a little bit less than what the regular price is. And I'm like, great, totally fine. Let's do it. Let's go, And then sometimes it's like, like I said, I have clients who pay me much, much less, like, pay me 10% of my full price rate. And I have enough clients who are paying at the highest end of things. And that highest end of things is set high enough by me. Like, I looked at the numbers and was like, how high does that number need to be in order to give away some spots for zero, or to give away some spots for very little? And so then I'm able to do that without any resentment. I don't feel resentful of my clients who pay me less, because the clients who are paying me more subsidize that.
They're paying you enough.
Exactly.
So do you have specific, do you have a specific set of, lower price clients that you've adjusted your capacity so you can take like 2 free clients with 5 full-time clients or whatever it is? Do you have a set number of lower price clients that you can take, and you can't really take any more than those at a given time?
Yes.
Or how did you approach that?
I have those numbers, and I have not had to use them. Like, I actually it tends to just stay in balance. I haven't ever had to turn I haven't yet. Maybe after I talk on this podcast about the fact that I will work with you for whatever price you can pay, more people will utilize that. But I think that for the most part, it just sort of works itself out. I don't know how else to describe it, but it like, that has not felt like a stressor. I think that's a thing that people get.
Well, I think people worry about that, of if I offer this at a more accessible price, that, we're indoctrinated into the capitalist system, that if people can get something for less, they're going to get something for less. And so the concern is always, what if nobody can pay the full price, or what if it totally throws everything out of alignment? And so it's interesting that hasn't happened for you, and it just kind of naturally comes to this equilibrium, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really explain it, except to say that is how it has worked out for me. I'm not sure. Maybe it wouldn't work out for everyone, but in general, I think for most of my clients, it works out. And I think frequently our own sense of like, no one could possibly pay that number is the thing that like gets in the way of us actually charging the number that would make it possible for us to then be able to give away some lower cost spots.
Well, it's interesting when we talk about different strategies for like pricing for accessibility and sliding scales and all of those sorts of things. It's interesting because so much of it bumps up against both our money mindset issues as a provider and the money mindset issues of the people receiving sometimes as well. Yes. And that it is unusual, like the structure of that, the offer, the idea of pricing for more accessibility is so unusual to us still, that it's just interesting the nuances that kind of go into that trying to build and structure your offerings that way.
Yeah, and I think, two things. One, I have had very occasionally, I have had somebody come into a sales call who has seen this thing on my website that says, if you can't afford it, like, we'll talk and make it work. And they have come in like ready to play hardball and are trying to negotiate with me. And I don't work with those people. I
imagine that's probably a pretty good red flag for you.
Yeah, I just say this is I don't think that this is a good fit. I don't think that we're like actually on the same page about these things. And so then I don't have to do the sort of like hardball negotiation because they're not a good fit in other, like, that desire to do that shows me that they're not a good fit for me in other ways.
Right.
And for the clients for whom that's not the approach that they're taking, I think the feedback that I've gotten is that the way that I do things with money is actually really healing for people to like come into a space with somebody who's like, I'm not judgmental about the fact that lots of people don't have money and can't afford my regular rates. I don't have any sense of being sort of like, this like benevolent being from upon high, bestowing my,
You're bestowing your gracious knowledge on the peons.
Exactly. Like I don't approach it in that way. I just am sort of like, I understand the reality of what it's like to be a person inside of capitalism. I know what it's like to not have enough. And I don't think that should be like, it just is so matter of fact to me that I don't think that should be a barrier for us to be able to get the services and the things that we need. And so, I think people frequently, much less often than the hardball negotiators, my clients and my potential clients, I think come with a lot of like guilt and shame about not being able to pay me my full rate. And I think it's really, it can be really transformative to offer people that they don't, that like, I'm like, you can feel whatever you want to feel, but like, don't feel like that on account of me. Like I do not want you to feel guilt or shame. Like that is not how that's not what I'm going for here at all. And I think it's really freeing and really healing for people to have an experience around money that really like, doesn't penalize them for not having enough.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because, as a culture, and I think probably every business owner I've ever spoken to has some sort of guilt or shame around money. Because it's just kind of drilled into us, and especially as business owners, the expectation is that like we understand our money shit and we got it all together.
Yep.
And that there's so much of that wrapped up in our finances and how we think about money and how we approach money that I could absolutely see the kind of untethering to be super freeing and just kind of a huge sigh of relief that it's not that kind of transaction.
It really is. And I think, the other thing that people, especially like students in my online course around money, tend to worry about is like, are people going to take advantage of me? Like one of the other strategies that I use is like offering long-term no interest payment plans, because frequently for people, the problem is not that they'll never have the money. They just like have a cash flow issue and they don't have it right now. Right. And there's a lot of concern about people like backing out on their payment plans or screwing you over. They said they were going to pay it and then they didn't pay it. And I really think something about this approach is so deeply humanizing that it takes people out of that kind of transactional mentality of feeling like my clients, I think by and large, do not feel like they're trying to like pull one over on me, or like the way that capitalism pits us against each other is so extractive and always trying to we're always all trying to get the most for the least, right? I'm trying to get the most money from you for the least amount of my effort, and you're trying to get the most amount of my knowledge and expertise for the least amount of your money, right? Like that's the game that we're taught to play inside of capitalism. But when I say, hey, I'm going to charge you the number that's based on what I need, and if you can't do that, that's okay. It just dissolves that kind of transactional energy, and then people don't screw me over. Like people, that's
kind of the fundamental philosophy of being an anti-capitalist in general is just kind of a general let's not be dicks to each other kind of philosophy. I mean, really, that's
Exactly.
That's kind of the fundamental premise behind it.
Yes, exactly. Let's just not be dicks to each other. And when I'm not a dick to my clients about money, then turns out they don't want to be a dick back to me.
So I'm sure there is a much more philosophical way to go about explaining it, but that's kind of the premise.
That's the gist. I don't disagree.
All right. I think that is a perfect place to go ahead and wrap it up. So where can our listeners find you if they want to connect or learn more about what you do?
Yes. So my website is bearcoaches.com. And that's where they can find all the information about my business consulting services and also Freely, the online course about pricing your work, which has 3 parts, sort of one about actually how to set your rates. The second part is about accessibility structures. And I go into all the kind of back end logistics of how to set up accessible structures for pricing. And then the third one is all about money mindset and sort of escaping scarcity mentality in a way that's not aligned with oppressive norms. And then I'm on Instagram, and that's sort of my main social media hub. I have a lot of video content there. So if you like hearing me talk, you can hear a whole lot more of me talking on my Instagram.
Awesome.
And my Instagram handle is just my name, so @bearabear with an underscore at the end of it.
Cool. Thank you so much for being here. This was such an interesting and I think, at least for me, a super valuable conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was super fun to get to come and talk with you today.
I love the concept of equating anti-capitalist movements to the core idea of let's just not be dicks to each other. Money is just a tool. It can be used to create amazing good, and it can also be used as an excuse to subjugate or justify unethical behavior. But in the end, it's just a tool, and a made-up one at that. Money has the value we attach to it, but no inherent value. So maybe we can start thinking about money as a tool to be kind to each other, to support one another, and to help create the change we want to see in the world. If you want to go a little bit deeper on money mindset or just join a conversation about money and business with some other business owners, come join me at the Dollars and Decisions Roundtable on January 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up at scalespark.co/dollarsanddecisions or just click the link in the show notes. Break the Ceiling is produced by Yellow House Media. Our executive producer is Sean McMullen. Our production coordinator is Lou Blazer. This episode was edited by Marty Seafeld with production assistance by Kristen Runbeck.